Imagine a metropolis fiercely torn between breathtaking magnificence and complete rotting ruin. During the 1600s, the French capital constantly vibrated on a razor's edge of extreme wealth and sheer decay. Its cramped, winding alleys were constantly choked with an overwhelming mixture of damp filth, thick soot, and heavy cosmetic. Deafening crowds shouted over one another in the bustling bazaars, loudly interrupted by cathedral towers tolling warnings of looming riot. Heavy wooden wheels rattled violently over the uneven cobblestones, brushing right past both starving street dwellers and elegantly dressed aristocrats. Cutting through it all, the river flowed steadily, acting as a vital artery for both legitimate cargo and dark, illicit deals. Hidden away securely behind closed blinds, powerful church officials plotted their political maneuvers, while desperate writers quietly sparked revolutions. This urban heart was terrifyingly brilliant, incredibly explosive, and driven by an insatiable hunger for something more. Standing right on the precipice of absolute, world-altering change, this is the brutal reality of the 17th century capital. But down on the Île Louviers, the atmosphere shifted into something completely rugged, unpolished, and deeply restless. This flat, swampy stretch of land was entirely swallowed up by massive lumber yards and enormous, drafty storage sheds. Along the slippery, waterlogged shores, countless heavy flatboats fought for space, while workers furiously unloaded endless supplies of wheat and logs. That entire district was defined by nothing but back-breaking physical labor, relentless sweat, and the dirty grime of the waterways. Yet, moving away from the water towards the grand monumental arches, the endless grit suddenly gave way to towering victory. It was right there, at those massive city gates, that an overwhelming sense of imperial glory unexpectedly collided with that majestic facade immediately collided with the everyday chaos of a capital constantly brewing with widespread societal unrest. Out on the bustling avenues, heavy horse-drawn carriages rattled noisily right past destitute vagabonds and lavishly dressed nobles alike. Meanwhile, the dark currents of the Seine flowed endlessly onward, washing in a complex mixture of lucrative trade and deep-rooted moral decay. Hidden safely behind tightly closed wooden shutters, powerful religious figures secretly plotted their next ambitious political maneuvers. Within those exact same shadows, fierce writers and local intellectuals quietly traded incredibly dangerous ideas of an impending uprising. This vibrant metropolis was a place of dazzling brilliance, constantly fluctuating moods, and a truly desperate, starving population. The entire sprawling capital was balancing precariously on the absolute brink of a massive, irreversible, historical transformation. This chaotic, magnificent reality beautifully defined the everyday existence of 17th century Paris in all its contrasting glory. Moving toward the prominent City Hall, the entire atmosphere abruptly shifted to project an intimidating display of stern governmental authority. That magnificent Renaissance exterior towered majestically above the main plaza, proudly standing as a flawless tribute to law and regulation. It was intentionally designed to look like a massive, unyielding fortress meant to enforce strict societal control over the public. But directly beneath those perfectly sculpted masonry blocks, the true heartbeat of the capital pounded with an erratic, nervous rhythm. A distinctly restless and uncertain energy constantly throbbed just below the surface of this supposedly disciplined administrative centre. Frantic royal couriers sprinted urgently over the uneven stone streets, desperately clutching tightly sealed official government decrees. Meanwhile, the low, steady rumble of angry civic arguments continuously floated out from the densely packed crowds gathered nearby. Down by the water, the docks were completely jammed with heavy cargo ships dropping off massive piles of wheat and timber. This fiercely industrious district was defined entirely by endless physical exertion and the harsh, unforgiving grime of the waterway. Further along, at the majestic gate, imperial military glory violently collided with the everyday filth of the sprawling metropolis. A massive, triumphant stone monument loomed directly over the chaotic, swirling mass of merchant wagons and weary travellers. Etched depictions of legendary battle scenes stared down silently from the masonry, observing the frantic hustle of ordinary survival below. Inside the cramped public chambers, local businessmen, legal officials, and desperate citizens aggressively shouted over each other to demand their dues. Out in the open plaza, everyday street hawkers constantly rubbed shoulders with fierce political radicals attempting to stir up local trouble. Their loud, impassioned cries bounced sharply off the imposing architecture, while a freezing breeze from the river cut right through the courtyard. Standing in this very spot, absolute governmental authority seemed simultaneously grandiose in its presentation, yet dangerously close to completely shattering. However, it was on the famous Central Bridge where the capital truly exposed its wild, beautifully untamed spirit to the world. This massive stone crossing was practically vibrating with chaotic life, completely overflowing with aggressive salespeople and wildly entertaining street performers. Shady outdoor barbers set up their makeshift shops right next to opportunistic pickpockets, creating a dizzying blur of non-stop, risky activity. Heavy hooves struck the pavement loudly as wealthy aristocrats paraded through the unwashed mayhem, wrapped tightly in blindingly vibrant silk fabric. Surrounding these aloof elites, the air was incredibly thick with whispered political secrets and the rustle of cheaply printed revolutionary tracts. It was a vibrant, unavoidable crossroads, where scandalous local rumours and highly subversive ideas flowed just as freely as the daily traffic. Couriers dashed over the uneven stones, clutching official sealed orders as they wove through the bustling street. A steady hum of intense arguments spilled outward from packed assembly rooms, filling the surrounding air with tension. Inside those walls, local merchants, judges, and desperate citizens vigorously fought to have their urgent demands heard. Back outdoors, humble street sellers rubbed shoulders with fiery political troublemakers in a highly volatile mix. Their combined voices bounced sharply off the stone facades, carrying far across the open public courtyard. All the while, a biting, frigid breeze blowing off the River Seine aggressively whipped through the plaza. In this chaotic space, the ruling authority appeared grand and formal, yet incredibly close to shattering entirely. Down below the bridge's grand vaults, rugged boat operators yelled fiercely to coordinate their congested river traffic. A pungent, foul odour drifted up from the dark waters, wrapping the lower banks in an unpleasant. This bustling intersection was a constantly observing, breathing beast of a thoroughfare that never truly rested. Every single inhalation here seemed heavy with the promise of newfound opportunity, laced with potential betrayal. Moving toward the Palais Royal, the metropolis abruptly shifted, exposing a highly refined facade of calculated dominance. Concealed beneath those elegant, sweeping archways, well-dressed aristocrats quietly exchanged highly valuable political intelligence and scandal. Step into the enclosed garden, however, and you would suddenly find an unusual, almost startling pocket of silence. Well-maintained gravel walkways crunched softly underfoot, winding their peaceful way past meticulously manicured greenery and shrubs. Gentle sounds of trickling fountains mingled with the scenery, wrapping the palpable political tension in a cloak of pure elegance. Moving away from that epicenter, the Luxembourg Palace stood proudly as a monument to Queen Marie de Medici's imposing legacy. This magnificent royal residence existed in stark contrast to the relentless, deafening roar of the busy Parisian streets. The grand structure towered above its surroundings with an unmistakable air of absolute tranquility and majestic, stately grace. Sprawling out just beyond the majestic building were breathtaking grounds, specifically designed to soothe the senses of its visitors. Impeccably organized walkways gracefully guided guests through a carefully curated landscape decorated with stunning classical sculpture. Vibrant floral arrangements and neatly sectioned garden beds brought a refreshing, sweet softness to the surrounding atmosphere. High-born lineages and prominent aristocratic clans frequently took leisurely walks through this sprawling, sunlit, verdant paradise. They wandered alongside the sharply shaped hedges, projecting a flawless image of carefree, relaxed nobility to any onlookers. Yet, underneath the soft rustle of their quiet footsteps, cunning political plots and royal machinations were constantly brewing. Further across the metropolis, Place des Victoires awaited, showcasing a completely different, triumphant face of the bustling capital. In this grand square, the city proudly flaunted its greatest conquests, immortalizing them for everyone to witness and admire. The capital's most glorious historical achievements were quite literally carved directly into the heavy, enduring stone of the plaza. It served as a massive, open-air celebration dedicated entirely to showcasing unmatched royal glory and architectural dominance. Right around this imposing monument to victory, wealthy merchants and prominent figures continued weaving the daily fabric of urban life. Hidden just behind the majestic archways, members of the royal court quietly exchanged their most closely guarded secrets. These enclosed gardens provided an unusual, tranquil refuge away from the chaotic noise of the sprawling capital. Neatly arranged gravel walkways and perfectly pruned trees stood alongside gently babbling fountains, creating a picture of serenity. Yet, this beautiful display of refined sophistication was merely a clever mask, carefully draped over the underlying political tension. Meanwhile, over at the magnificent Luxembourg Palace, Queen Marie de Medici's lavish residence remained completely insulated from the urban uproar. This imposing structure stood with peaceful majesty, gazing down upon beautifully structured landscapes filled with striking classical statues. Vibrant sections of the meticulously planned garden seemed to visually soften the very atmosphere surrounding the royal grounds. Aristocratic families leisurely wandered through the precisely cut greenery, enjoying the peacefulness of the afternoon. However, their muffled footsteps on the soft earth cleverly concealed the cunning political plots they were actively weaving together. Returning to the circular expanse of Place des Victoires, the perfectly balanced architecture served a much deeper psychological purpose. Passing soldiers and intrigued spectators wandered the open area, their movements quieted by the sheer symmetry of the design. This environment represented absolute certainty and control, engineered specifically to pacify the inherently rebellious soul of the capital. Right at the heart of this perfectly rounded plaza stood the commanding, proud figure of King Louis XIV. As his undeniable authority reflected off the gleaming buildings, another monumental giant watched over the city's historic center. Notre Dame loomed proudly over the Ile de la Cité, its shadowed masonry absorbing the gentle glow of the river. The heavy chiming of the cathedral bells sent strong vibrations rippling through the surrounding cobblestone street. Stepping through the massive doors, the interior was veiled in the dim, soaring shadows of the vaulted ceilings. A thick, fragrant haze of burning incense floated slowly upward, filling the cavernous religious space. Hidden within the gloom, faithful locals knelt in quiet devotion, voicing their deepest desire. They softly whispered their intimate anxieties and desperate prayers into the sacred, echoing silence of the cathedral. Moving far to the western boundaries of the sprawling metropolis, an entirely different atmosphere awaited the residents. The magnificent Tuileries gardens unfolded in meticulously arranged lines of sculpted foliage and pristine landscaping. Intersecting gravel walkways crunched beneath the feet of those seeking refuge from the unrelenting urban chaos. This perfectly curated park provided the weary inhabitants of Paris with an unusual, sweeping expanse of tranquility. Venturing even further past the manicured borders of this green sanctuary lay the monumental Porte de la Conférence. At this specific checkpoint, the densely packed architecture of the capital finally began to dissolve. The suffocating, narrow streets gradually gave way to wide, unoccupied terrain at the very edge of town. A steady gust blowing off the nearby Seine swept up fine clouds of earth along the perimeter. Carried on that very same river wind were the hushed, scandalous rumors filtering down from the royal court. Meanwhile, drawing near the bustling area of Porte Saint-Bernard, the city presented yet another sprawling urban vista. Serving as a symbol of the crown's ultimate power, the colossal structure of Notre Dame loomed heavily over the Ile de la Cité. The cathedral's blackened masonry seemed to absorb the reflections from the nearby water, standing watch like an ancient, quiet sentinel. Heavy chimes from its great bells echoed fiercely, sending deep vibrations rolling across the cobblestone avenues of the capital. Within those cold, arched corridors, a thick haze of incense smoke curled upward as the faithful softly prayed for salvation. Far out on the western boundary of the metropolis, the Tuileries gardens unfurled their perfectly manicured lines of timber and crushed stone. This carefully structured green space granted the local citizens a much-needed breath of tranquility, away from the urban chaos. Leaving those serene paths behind, one would encounter the Porte de la Conférence, an ancient stone boundary gazing out toward the unpaved wilderness. Approaching Porte Saint-Bernard, the atmosphere shifted drastically as the landscape gave way to the turbulent and unforgiving waters of the Seine. Massive, flat-bottomed boats crowded the docks, heavily burdened with essential shipments of fresh lumber and harvested wheat. The rough voices of sailors barked commands, barely heard over the deafening clatter of wooden wagons rolling toward the commercial squares. Standing firm against the elements, the battered ancient gateways observed this endless flow of commerce, like tired but vigilant guardians. They formed a distinct borderline, separating the cramped residential alleyways from the relentless, back-breaking toil of the riverfront. Back inside the city walls, the civilian population was compressed into almost unimaginably tight living conditions. Countless households were forced together in towering, precarious structures that physically bowed toward each other across the dark alleys. It was a suffocating environment, endlessly expanding as the metropolis rapidly surged beyond 500,000 breathing inhabitants. Moving towards the outskirts, the dense urban sprawl gave way to open terrain, where the river's gusts swept up dirt and whispered noble rumours. Down at Port Saint-Bernard, the urban landscape yielded to the Seine's more aggressive and untamed waters. Heavy barges aggressively pushed into the docks, laden with essential supplies of golden grain and fresh lumber. Sailors yelled over the deafening clatter of wooden wheels as heavily loaded carts rumbled their way toward the bustling marketplaces. Through this endless cacophony, a relentless tide of tradesmen, servants, scribes, and wealthy merchants navigated their grueling daily routine. In such a hyper-compressed existence, discovering a moment of true solitude was an absolute impossibility for the average resident. The vibrant, chaotic heartbeat of the capital echoed loudly up every single staircase and vibrated through every shared stone courtyard. Meanwhile, the absolute poorest residents huddled desperately on cathedral steps and gathered around the draughty corners of stone bridges. Shivering against the biting, moisture-laden winds blowing off the water, they bundled themselves tightly in whatever torn fabrics they could scavenge. Destitute outcasts stretched out their weathered hands, desperately begging hurried passers-by for a spare copper coin or a stale crust of bread. Trailing closely at their sides were frail, exhausted youths, their pale faces marked by tragically sunken, lifeless eyes. This grim reality of poverty existed in stark, uncomfortable contrast to the nearby grand royal palaces and thriving commercial hubs. No matter where wealthy citizens walked, the shadow of absolute destitution remained an ever-present, unavoidable fixture in the urban landscape. These forgotten souls served as a silent, haunting testament to the starvation and misery lurking just beneath the city's prosperity. It was a persistent, unspoken ache of deep woe that the rapidly growing metropolis simply could not manage to wash away. Countless families were crammed into towering, densely packed buildings that seemed to loom over the incredibly narrow alleyways. The sprawling metropolis had rapidly expanded, swelling to accommodate a staggering population of well over 500,000 residents. Every day was a chaotic blur of exhausting labor and deafening noise as merchants, clerks and tradesmen rushed about. True privacy was practically non-existent, with the relentless heartbeat of the capital echoing through every shared courtyard and tight stairwell. Seeking shelter from the biting, damp winds, destitute citizens huddled tightly together on church steps and at the edges of bridges. Shivering in their tattered garments, they desperately begged for any spare change or discarded bread crusts from passing strangers. Despite the opulent markets and grand estates, this underlying thread of starvation was seamlessly stitched into the fabric of everyday urban life. However, the bitter climate brought its own unique transformations, as winters during that era were far more severe than they are now. The dropping temperatures were so extreme that the mighty river Seine would frequently freeze entirely solid from bank to bank. Rather than hiding indoors, eager locals would actually swarm out onto the thick ice, equipped with sleds and rudimentary ice skates. Enterprising vendors quickly set up temporary wooden stalls, miraculously transforming the frozen waterway into a vibrant, massive winter carnival. For a fleeting moment, the harsh, freezing days felt joyful and remarkably carefree as people celebrated right on the ice. Not far from this chilly festivity, a local pastry chef labored intensely inside his pleasantly heated, oven-filled kitchen. The irresistible, comforting aromas of melting butter and caramelized sugar wafted out, offering a stark contrast to the frosty air outside. A mouth-watering display of fresh biscuits, glazed fruits and rich tarts continuously lured eager customers right up to his shop window. Both wealthy aristocrats and common labourers lingered by the shop, pausing their day for these small, sweet indulgences. The baker's exquisite culinary art provided a much-needed, fleeting sanctuary from the harsh realities of the era. Yet, just outside that warm glow, destitute figures with sunken eyes haunted the edges of the streets. Whether loitering near bustling public squares or grand royal estates, their lingering presence was entirely inescapable. These silent onlookers served as a grim, persistent reminder of the famine woven into the capital's daily fabric. It was a metropolis defined by stark contrasts, where delicate culinary pleasures existed alongside deafening noise and starvation. Seeking another type of escape from the grim streets, many citizens gravitated toward the famed Galerie du Palais. Within this enclosed arcade, lively merchants peddled freshly printed political tracts and secretly traded illicit poetry. A few steps away, a haberdasher's elaborate setup caught the light, gleaming with exquisite threads and textiles. Vibrant, silky ribbons and rolls of premium fabric constantly tempted the gaze of fashion-conscious passers-by. The entire passageway hummed incessantly with scandalous whispers, heated negotiations, and eager merchants haggling over prices. Every shadowed corner and bright merchant display seemed to echo with the restless rustle of fierce social ambition. It felt as though the entire dynamic spectrum of city existence had been squeezed into this vibrant space. The bustling, narrow corridor perfectly encapsulated the manic, compressed energy of everyday Parisian society. It was exactly within this bustling, deeply divided urban landscape of 1628 that King Louis XIII reigned. Warm air drifted from the ovens, carrying the irresistible scent of melting butter and caramelized sugar. Mouth-watering tarts, delicate cookies, and candied fruits lured massive crowds right to the confectioner's doorway. Inside, wealthy aristocrats rubbed elbows with exhausted commoners, all seeking a momentary taste of sweet indulgence. The master baker's exquisite creations provided a much-needed, fleeting sanctuary from their everyday struggle. These tiny, delicate delights offered a rare comfort amidst a sprawling metropolis plagued by clamour and starvation. Nearby, at the famous commercial galleries, vendors fiercely peddled freshly printed pamphlets and secretly traded banned poetry. Just steps away, merchant stalls dazzled eager passers-by with vibrant ribbons and the most luxurious, shimmering textiles. Overseeing this vibrant world alongside the king, the formidable Cardinal Richelieu maintained a high-stakes, delicate political balance. It was the cardinal's cunning tactical mind that navigated his sovereign through treacherous military sieges and court conspiracies. Together, their relentless combined willpower proved to be the absolute anchor, keeping the fractured kingdom from shattering entirely. Following him, Cardinal Mazarin eventually took the reins of state, governing with a quiet, deeply calculated brilliance. He expertly maneuvered the French Empire through devastating conflicts, violent uprisings, and highly fragile periods of tranquility. Though his voice rarely rose above a polite murmur, his unwavering political resolve was legendary across the realm. With this firm but gentle hand, Mazarin carefully moulded the destiny and early education of the future king. As the son of the reigning monarch, young Louis XIV grew up haunted by the kingdom's chaotic turbulence. Never forgetting the past turmoil, the monarch made a solemn pledge to himself regarding the capital's future. He would bring the rebellious city to heel, not just by force, but through sheer, overwhelming magnificence. His reign would rely equally on absolute authority and breathtaking splendor to maintain unyielding control. Once he officially took the throne, this vast, ambitious vision for the metropolis was swiftly put into motion. The sovereign tackled the chaotic layout of the city with an unmatched, sweeping architectural drive. Ancient defensive barricades were systematically torn down to make way for a much grander design. In their place, magnificent, wide avenues were laid out, completely modernizing the old urban landscape. He pushed further, boldly slicing directly into the crowded medieval core of the bustling settlement. Spectacular public spaces, such as the Grand Place des Victoires, were carefully carved out of tightly packed neighborhoods. The breathtaking Place Vendôme was also meticulously etched into the city fabric, bringing elegance to the dense center. To ensure his supreme dominance remained unquestioned, monumental structures were commissioned to line the new streets. Grand triumphal gateways, most notably the imposing Porte Saint-Martin, soon rose high above the local crowd. These towering stone monuments served one distinct purpose: to endlessly glorify the crown's immense and undeniable power. Beyond physical structures, the ruler also established prestigious new organizations to elevate the nation's intellectual culture. He heavily reinforced the royal academies, actively flooding the metropolis with the finest architects and master sculptors. Master fountain makers were also summoned, tasked with executing a sweeping vision of classical elegance throughout the streets. As time passed, the spectacular Palace of Versailles would rise to become the dazzling focal point of his court. Yet, despite his eventual retreat to the countryside, Paris never ceased being the monarch's ultimate public stage. The sprawling metropolis was thoroughly reorganized, permanently transformed by the sheer, unyielding force of his sovereign will. He brought literal and metaphorical light to the capital, illuminating its darkest corners through visionary urban planning. Under this relentless guidance, the historic city shed its old skin to adopt an entirely unprecedented identity. The chaotic medieval atmosphere was swiftly replaced by a highly disciplined environment that demanded absolute reverence. It blossomed into a capital of undeniable brilliance, standing as a living testament to its ambitious ruler. Every single plaza and boulevard was deliberately engineered to reflect the dazzling radiance of the Sun King. While meticulously shaping his kingdom's heart, the ruler also tightened his grip on his own royal household. His relatives were summoned to gather closely around the throne, forming a tight-knit web of political influence. Within this elite inner circle, each family member was firmly bound by an unspoken code of royal duty. However, just beneath that polished surface of loyalty, fierce personal ambitions constantly simmered among his closest kin. These aristocrats orbited their sovereign much like celestial bodies, their entire existence dependent on his enduring favor. Standing prominently at the center of this complex constellation was the Dauphin, shouldering the heavy weight of the dynasty. Beyond the palace walls, the monarch established formidable institutions and significantly bolstered the military might of his realm. He flooded the streets of Paris with master architects, skilled sculptors, and brilliant engineers to execute his grand designs. These craftsmen were tasked with transforming the urban landscape, filling the capital with magnificent fountains and unparalleled classical elegance. While Versailles served as his private, sun-drenched sanctuary for the court, Paris was retained as his ultimate public theatre. The sprawling metropolis was thoroughly reorganized and brilliantly illuminated, bending entirely to the unyielding willpower of the sovereign. During his reign, the capital adopted a remarkably disciplined and radiant new identity, stripping away its former chaotic nature. Every street and square was meticulously molded by the monarch, deliberately designed to mirror his own divine brilliance. Back within the royal fold, the king's brothers were carefully groomed to forge vital alliances and serve the crown's interests. Meanwhile, the aristocratic women, his daughters and nieces, wielded their own brand of quiet, calculated power behind closed doors. Figures like Madame de Maintenon exercised a profound strategic influence, gently steering the hidden currents of courtly politics. Together, this carefully orchestrated network of relatives functioned as a highly disciplined and virtually impenetrable dynasty. As the 17th century drew to a close, the king's grand vision extended to the very heart of Parisian leisure. Working alongside the visionary Le Nôtre, he completely overhauled the Tuileries Gardens, imposing a breathtaking geometric harmony upon nature. Wild foliage was ruthlessly tamed into sweeping, symmetrical patterns that showcased the absolute triumph of royal order over chaos. Expansive walkways, perfectly manicured hedges, and exact botanical arrangements began to attract awe-struck city dwellers into this sculpted paradise. Every aspect of this magnificent court was deliberately designed to mirror the dazzling radiance of the Sun King himself. His closest relatives orbited him not just out of love, but bound by a complex constellation of ambition and strict duty. The Dauphin, as the direct heir to the throne, carried the immense and often crushing weight of securing the kingdom's future. Meanwhile, the monarch's brothers were carefully moulded from birth to serve the crown through strategic military and political alliances. The women of the bloodline, including his daughters and nieces, also played pivotal roles in maintaining the delicate balance of power. At the very centre of this web, Madame de Maintenon wielded a quiet yet profoundly strategic influence over the sovereign. United by these shared obligations, they operated as an unshakable ruling house, projecting absolute strength to the rest of Europe. This same relentless drive for total control spilled out from the palace walls, perfectly reflected in the surrounding urban landscape. The transformation of the public gardens turned unruly nature into a sprawling masterpiece of sheer mathematical precision and royal vision. Sweeping avenues and perfectly sculpted shrubbery offered the people of Paris a breathtaking display of absolute, unyielding symmetry. Every single leaf and pathway felt tranquil, meticulously measured, and flawlessly organized to inspire awe in all who visited. It stood as a living, breathing testament to a monarch who successfully commanded not just his people, but the very earth itself. And with that breathtaking panoramic view, our immersive reconstruction of 17th century Paris comes to its grand and final conclusion. We hope this digital restoration brought the incredible majesty and intricate politics of the Sun King's golden era vividly back to life. If you enjoyed stepping back into the past with us today, make sure to subscribe for even more captivating historical adventures.